Hello, I'm Fast Lawyer. I'm with Oculus Rift Reviews. Today we're going to review Boiling Steel VR, a game on the Steam store by Merowin, the same developer that made Guns and Stories Bulletproof VR. This game is available for every headset. It normally retails $19.99. I got a free Steam key through the Steam Creator Connect program to review this game. And yes, this is the final review. I beat the game. It took me a little over 6.5 hours to beat the game, and I did play on the engineer difficulty. That's one less than the master hardest difficulty. And I did notice there's a big difference between the master and the engineer. With the master, you really take a lot of damage really quickly. So you do have to attack the levels a lot slower with the master levels. I don't recommend that. I think engineer is the perfect difficulty for most players. And if you find that difficulty a little too difficult, you can definitely try something easier, but that's the one I would start out with. Now, this game is weird because it starts off very strongly, and I was loving this game when I first played it. The first 2 hours I thought were amazing, and the introduction is very strong, but as you go along, you run into this gameplay loop that becomes pretty repetitive, and you see the potential in this game. So this game is in early access, so it still has time to improve, and with some work, some updates, this could be an amazing game. It could be one of the best VR games out there. But this game does fall short of greatness, so I'm kind of disappointed in this game. Usually I'm disappointed in a game because it's not good. This is not the case here. This game is good, but it could have been great. It could have been one of the best VR games. And unfortunately, it falls short of that just because of some developer decisions. And this game has an odd pacing. Like, it starts off very strong. You have this Western themed voice narrator giving you this what sounds like a really good story, and then it just flips. It totally just does a 180. You're no longer guided by this Western sounding voice narrator. Instead, you have this female robotic voice narrator that's pretty dull, and you lose all interest in the story. And you just run into this gameplay loop at this point, and as you go along, there's enough there to keep you going. You get different weapons, you get different upgrades, you get new special abilities, and that's all cool. And there's even some new dangers out there. There's the landmines, there's the turrets. I don't believe the enemies change, but you definitely get more of them. And that's part of the problem. So the level designs, they get a little repetitive. Like, you see a lot of the themes over and over again. Like, you'll see the space stations theme a lot. You know, this in outer space, and I don't know if it's zero gravity, but it's floating in the air, this floating space station. And you see that a lot. The same level theme. Now, the mission design layout is different each time. Like, I'm not saying they're exactly the same. There's differences in the layout, but the theme is the same. The enemies are the same. And while there are quite a bit of enemies, okay, there are. There's even like little mini bosses that are much harder to bring down. You have your ranged enemies, you have your melee enemies, you have your flying drones, and you have your roll on the ground drones that explode. Those are all wonderful, but after a while you've seen them all, and nothing is added to the formula. Not really. Other than the mines and the turrets, there's really not much difference between the first few missions and the later missions. Just more enemies. And this game is weird in that it starts out difficult, and you're like, wow, this is a challenging game. But once you get your upgrades, it becomes so much easier than the first level. So as you go along, the game actually gets easier because of your upgrades. And the one thing that maybe brings some challenge in this game is if you want to level your weapons. So your weapons start out very weak when you unlock a new weapon, and there are new weapons as you go along. That's something that keeps this game interesting. And your weapons start out very weak, so if you want to upgrade your weapon, you have to kill enough enemies with it. So again, you're back to not being as strong as you can be. Obviously, you don't have to do that. You can keep using your strong weapon, and I have to tell you, it really doesn't make a difference. If you like a weapon and it's strong, you might as well go ahead and keep using it, because there really is no point to upgrading the lower weapon, because this game just ends abruptly. And you saw the message earlier, it just says basically thank you for playing. You can contact the developer on Steam. So it does end abruptly with just this a little peek at the future content, which looks good. But for right now, like, there's no boss fights. The only challenge in maybe some of the levels is that there's this horde mode basically that happens where you just have to defend a point against wave of enemies, and that's really the only really hard part of this game, is when that occurs on some levels. But other than that, all you do is kill all the enemies and get to the end. When you turn on this device and the mission ends abruptly, you go to the main hub. If you can do an upgrade, you do an upgrade. If you got a new weapon, you can try that out. Rinse and repeat all the way to the end. And this gameplay loop is never broken. There's not enough variety in the gameplay. One thing that I would like to have seen is for the enemy AI to be either better, or for them to have weapons to actually take out some of the things you might do in response to what the enemies do to try to attack you. For example, when you're rushed by a lot of enemies, you can get behind a corner, take out your melee weapon and just mow them down as they all walk towards you, except the ranged enemies. But you can basically wipe out all the enemies, and the few ranged that are left, you can just pick them off then after that point. So without a grenade or any ability for the enemies to smoke you out or their ability to flank you, it becomes a much easier game than I believe was intended. There's no boss fights. I think it does need some boss fights to keep it interesting. Maybe the use of grenades and stuff would be awesome, not just by the enemies, but by yourself. And I think the upgrades should be a little bit easier to spec into. It's not until the late game that you really get some good upgrades to make you viable. And like I said, it just makes the game easier when it was difficult at the start. Overall, I have to give this game a 7 out of 10, which I'm disappointed to give such a low score. I was expecting to give this game a much higher score, but it just became too repetitive. I hope it's in early access. I hope it improves. I hope more variety is added. I hope some boss fights are added. Maybe the use of vehicles. Yeah, it could be so much better.